Hey everyone, my name's Amber Tuttle, and I'm super excited to be here today to speak to you about a topic near and dear to my heart called dysphagia or dysphagia. And basically what that is any difficulty eating, chewing, swallowing, any of those areas. So we're going to talk about what it is and what you can do at home to make things a little bit easier around that for you. So who I am, and why am I talking about this, right? So like I said, I'm Amber Tuttle, and I'm a second-year occupational therapy assistant student at Durham Tech. I have my bachelor's in social work, and in my free time, so I do live here in Wake Forest, and in my free time, I have a child. I've got 3 cats and 2 dogs and a wonderful husband. So I spend a lot of time with them, and I hopefully will one day get my master's in occupational therapy. So that's a little bit about me, but why is it important? Why is this topic important to me in general? So my grandfather is 88 now, and unfortunately he does have some dementia, and with that came along a fear of swallowing. And what that caused is some issues with his swallow muscles, and so he has dysphagia. And now I am the maker of all of his meals. So he is on a puree diet, and we'll talk about all the different diets in a little bit. But I've had to get really creative in trying to figure out the best way to help him get all of his nutrition and make it through a mealtime without any issues. So let's get into it. So why are we here today? What do I want you to walk away with? First, I want you to understand a little bit about what occupational therapy is. And then learn a little bit about dysphagia, so have a clear understanding of what the dysphagia is. Any signs or warning signs of dysphagia, like what if you saw something in one of your loved ones or yourself, like when should you ask questions to a provider, and tips and tricks that you could use in your everyday life, even if you don't have dysphagia, that might make mealtime a little bit more fun and pleasant in your home. So let's start with occupational therapy. So the technical definition of occupational therapy is that occupational therapy practitioners provide and enable people of all ages to live life to their fullest by helping them engage in meaningful occupations. And a lot of people are like, oh, so you help people find jobs? No. What's important to you? Eating is an occupation. Going to the bathroom, knitting, painting, fishing, dressing, bathing, any aspect of your life that you do that's meaningful in some way. And sometimes those are things that we have to do. We have to eat, we have to bathe, we have to use the bathroom. Sometimes they're leisure activities. Driving is a big one. If something happens and you need help adjusting so you're able to drive safely, occupational therapists can do that. So occupational therapists can help in many different ways in your life, depending on what is important to you and your loved ones. The best example I use too is, like my grandfather, right? So he's not worried about cooking because I get to make all his meals for him, but he does want to be able to shower by himself. So an occupational therapist wouldn't focus on getting him to cook because that's not important to him, but they would help him with the bathing aspect. So just some things to keep in mind there. And as you can see on the slide, there's a whole list of things that occupational therapists do. All right, so what is dysphagia? So it's the dysfunction of any stage of eating, whether it's from the moment you put it in your mouth to when you're halfway done chewing to the actual swallow, and it's making sure that you're able to do all of those things safely without any issues. So what does it look like? Okay, so dysphagia symptoms, what does it look like when you might have dysphagia, and what are the yellow flags, things to start looking out for? So some big ones, somebody can't swallow, so sometimes it can be painful or the person actually can't use their swallow muscles to get food down. They could have pain or just can't get it down. So those are those two boxes on the slide. They could drool excessively, or they even sometimes will pocket food in their mouth instead of actually swallowing it, so it appears that they are chewing, and that's actually really dangerous. It could be a choking risk because they could forget that they put that food in their mouth. But we'll talk about that in a minute. They could become hoarse or have regurgitation. So if they try to swallow and it doesn't get all the way down, they could bring that food back up. Frequent heartburn, unexpected weight loss, which means they're not getting enough to eat for various reasons, maybe because they can't actually swallow the food. They cough or gag a lot while they're eating. And when we choke, it's natural to have that cough. I'm known to do this. I'm like, oh, I went down the wrong hole, and I cough and cough. But when somebody's doing that frequently, it's definitely a cause for some questions to make sure that they're able to eat safely. And then having the person, if they want their food cut in really small pieces, or they're avoiding certain foods because they're difficult to swallow. Those are all things that you really want to look out for. So what causes this? Unfortunately, one of the things, one is neurological disorders. So that could be dementia, Alzheimer's. There's a lot of people in that category that do have issues. There's also aging. Your swallow muscles just get tired with age. Everybody's been using them their whole life. And so sometimes they just get tired and malfunction like any other muscle in the body. So the other area that we see a lot is, or you can see, is somebody like has cancer. Sometimes medications can cause issues. And so that's why, as we're talking about this, if you're like, oh my gosh, this kind of sounds like me, or this sounds like my loved one, it's really important to speak to your doctor, your care team, so they can make sure to get the proper evaluations. And we'll talk about that more too. So who's at risk? Older people, aging, we just talked about that, and then people with certain neurological diseases like dementia. So what happens? Like, why is this such a big deal? One, it can cause your loved one to choke. The second one is aspiration. So when somebody swallows and they get liquid, I keep pointing to my neck, but when you swallow, right, and you get liquid into your lungs because they're coughing or gagging, a little bit of liquid can go in there, and then they can't get it back out, and it can cause aspiration is what that's called, and it can also cause bacteria to go in your lungs, which causes pneumonia. The other one would be malnutrition and dehydration. Somebody gets to the point that they're not communicating about maybe that they need help or assistance in figuring out how to swallow, or that it's painful. They just stop eating as much, and that's where you see the malnutrition part come in. Okay, so now we know what it is. We know what it looks like, what causes it, risk factors, like all the bad stuff. But let's talk about how you make meals and work through this, because a lot of people deal with this, and there are things that are really easy to do in your everyday life. So one thing I learned is to make sure you're making food that the person enjoys. And this reminds me of my grandpa, because my grandpa loves canned salmon. I think it's completely disgusting. I would never eat canned salmon, not my cup of tea. I'm not a tuna girl either, though. So, but my grandpa loves canned salmon. So what do I make for him? Pureed salmon. Not because I like it, not because I want my house to smell like pureed salmon, but because it's his favorite. Make sure that you're preparing. So while you're preparing that, right? So you've picked their favorite things. It could be favorite ingredients, My grandfather likes things on the sweeter side, but somebody might like savory things. Make sure you're picking things that work for your loved one or yourself. Make sure you're preparing food to consistencies needed by your loved one. So so for example, my grandfather's on pureed meals, so I do puree everything, and I'll talk about how to do that very easily. But if your loved one needs minced food, if they need, like thicker consistencies, your doctor and care team will be able to tell you where it should fall, and then make sure you're following those guidelines so they can eat safely. Involve that loved one in the cooking process as much as possible. Keeping somebody involved in cooking helps them, one, feel like they have a purpose if they're interested in that. Some people might not want to be involved, or they could help pick out menus or come up with new things to try. It's always fun. And know that this process does not have to be expensive. I shop a lot at like an Aldi or a Lidl or some of the discount stores, and so it doesn't always have to be super expensive. It can definitely fit any budget that is out there. My other fun tip is use like broth. So I use a lot of canned vegetables just because it's easier to puree, but I take all of the liquid out of the can. And then I use a broth, like a vegetable broth. I use chicken broth. I even have used like cream of coconut before to add some flavor, because nobody wants to, some people might love the juice from the canned vegetables, but I have found that my grandfather likes some of the other flavors better. And you can use that to actually thin things down to the right consistency that you need. And have fun with it. Try new things. The other week I did butternut squash with coconut, pureed chicken, and a little cumin and salt and pepper. And he was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. So almost anything can be pureed. Just be aware of things like string beans, if they still have the strings in them. A lot of beans don't puree really well. Lima beans do okay, but some of the other ones that have a harder casing won't puree as well. And you do have to cook things longer to be able to get them softer in the preparation phase. Okay, so helpful kitchen tools. You can see this up on your up on the screen. So the one, and goodness, that didn't come out very good, but it's a potato masher. So you can actually mash, like it can be the whole meal, like just stick it all in there and like mash it up. And that way you get more of that mince consistency without having to spend a lot of money. You can get those at like Walmart or Target. I even think the dollar store might have some. These Ziploc twist containers have been the most helpful for me because they twist on and they have a dark top, so I can use a label on the top of everything. So it's really easy for my grandfather to see. He has macular degeneration too, so we're working with some vision issues. And then it doesn't spill. So just be aware of what you're putting things in, if it can be frozen, if it, like whatever meets your family needs. But I put that there because it's been awesome. The other thing I use a lot is an Instapot, and I know those are really popular right now. If you don't have one, don't worry, it'll be okay. There's plenty of other things that you can use. You can just put it in a pot on the stove and let it cook down that way. Takes a little bit longer, but not a big deal. So don't feel like you have to spend money on these items. The other one is like a food masher. And that gives you that really easy mince consistency without as much manpower as what the potato masher takes. So it really just depends on what you need. The thing that I do use to make my purees that has been amazing is I use a blender. I use like a Ninja food processor. I think ours was like $70, and I know that's out of reach for a lot of people. But you can use any blender really that you have. You can also use an emulsifier or mixers with the batters, and that'll shred your chicken up and everything real thin if you need to. So get creative, play around with things. Don't be afraid to make a little bit of a mess. I made a lot of a mess in the beginning. But I do use the Ninja blender to get my purees. So the next thing in the middle is this plate separator. So what I have found, and my grandfather uses like a sectioned out plate as well, is that with purees, they mix a lot together. And so some people don't like their food touching, some people love it. So this just is an idea of something that you can put on a plate really easily, so their food is separated out by what they like. The last thing is my label maker. I have personally found that the white labels on the back, so it's like white with black writing, is the easiest to see. But I do label everything with what it is and the date that I make it, because I freeze a lot of meals so that way I can cook in batches. Okay, so now we have prepared our meal. So how do we set up like the table and like the situation so we can actually eat? So posture is so important. And I know sometimes people will be in their wheelchairs, and this is a good chair to do it. Like if they're slumped back and then they're eating, sometimes they could be laying more than this, or they're in a bed or a reclined chair. And our loved ones look so comfortable. You're just like, gosh, I'm so comfortable. I don't want to sit up. Please, please, please sit up upright. Gravity is our friends. So when we swallow, right, here's our throat. Let gravity help us make that a little bit easier. So it's actually worse to be laying down. So sit upright in a comfortable chair. If your loved one can't sit up on their own, like they're working on their sitting balance, you can prop them up with pillows behind them or on their sides just to kind of help stabilize them so they can sit up and safely eat. So now we're sitting. Now we're going to set the environment. So when you set a table or a tray or something like that, only put what the person needs. I know pretty tables are amazing. I'm guilty of this too. But if you just set the silverware that they need and a napkin and their drink, just very, very simple, then you eliminate all those extra distractions at the table so they can just focus on eating the things that are on their plate. Remove the clutter from the table. I think I just said that. And then sit and eat with your loved one. Create a social mealtime. Now, might it be a little too chaotic if there's 20 people at the table having loud conversations while the person's eating? For some families, that's what they're used to, so that's nothing different. For other people, they need to minimize those distractions so they can eat. The person may be embarrassed that, like, oh, I'm going to choke in front of people and I don't want to do that. So just kind of watch what your loved one's doing. If they do better in a quiet, like one-on-one environment, make that happen for them. But also, that person's probably used to having some kind of social interaction while they eat. So try to make that happen as well. It's just a balance that you're working on for your loved one. While the person is actually eating, use simple cues. So if you notice that they're pocketing the food, be like, oh, don't forget to swallow. And then just wait and watch. Make sure as you're eating, you're observing those bites, though, actually being chewed and swallowed each time, and that your loved one is safe. Be prepared to intervene in an emergency. So when I was doing this presentation, for another group, somebody was like, Amber, are you saying that we should all have CPR and first aid? And the answer to that is that's never bad, but make sure you know, like, what is your plan if your loved one begins choking? Like, can you handle that? Is that something that you could learn? What is your plan? Because when it happens, it's so scary, and you just don't want to be caught off guard if you don't need to be. Be social, come up with topics. We have like conversation cards, because I know sometimes it's like, oh, it's just another day, like we can talk about the weather, but there's other topics and things that you could talk about fall or maybe holidays that are coming up, grandkids or other loved ones, just whatever is important to you or the person that you're eating with, so you could have that conversation. Maybe it's just what's going to be on Wheel of Fortune or Jeopardy tonight. My grandfather loves Wheel of Fortune too. So routine is really important, and I can't stress that enough. Like eating meal times around similar times, similar lengths of time, making, you know, like, okay, my fork's always going to be here, and, you know, this is the consistency of food I'm looking for. I'm looking for minced or pureed, or we didn't talk about this yet, but there's this thing called thicket, and it actually thickens liquid, because sometimes liquids can be too thin. And so, like, okay, my water is the consistency that it should be. So making that routine so that your loved one has no stress while they are sitting down to eat, so they can eat as comfortably and as much as possible with no worries. And don't forget, everybody can help with cleanup. So after you've eaten, which is fantastic, right? You've made it all the way through mealtime, which some nights probably feels like an accomplishment, especially if your loved one has dementia or some form, you know, some issues. Have your loved one help clean up. Maybe you're using paper plates so they can throw them away, or maybe they can load the dishwasher, put them in the sink. Whatever is safe and your loved one is able to do is always helpful. So let's review. We have talked about occupational therapy. So remember, occupational therapy helps you with anything, any occupation, and that's not work, that you love. So leisure activities, eating, cleaning, bathing, cooking, dressing, you name it, OT can help you with it. We now know dysphagia is a swallowing disorder, and signs and symptoms like what to look out for in your loved ones. We've learned some tips and tricks and about eating throughout this. And then the other thing I'm going to leave you with is anytime you're in doubt, anytime you're like, oh my gosh, does my loved one have an issue, or oh my gosh, this triggers me, like I think that my loved one could have something like this going on and I don't know what to do, ask for help. You have, go talk to a doctor, go talk to your care team, ask somebody who you should talk to because your loved one has eating concerns. It's really important that you know that you're not in this alone. There are lots of people that are able to help you and would love to help you kind of figure out the best path for you and your family. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching and listening. You can see my resources, and I just really appreciate it. I hope you have a good rest of your day.